What started as a routine flight for Senator Marcus Reed quickly spiraled into something far bigger, a confrontation that would expose one of the airline industry's darkest secrets. Denied his first-class seat without reason, Marcus quickly realized he wasn't just dealing with a booking error. This was something deliberate, something meant to keep people like him from sitting in the wrong part of the plane. But the airline had no idea who they were dealing with. As the tension escalated, hidden policies, secret surveillance, and corporate corruption came to light, turning a simple flight into a battle for justice. By the time the plane landed, the entire world was watching. How did one denied ticket unravel an entire system of discrimination? And how did Marcus turn the tables on a billion-dollar corporation? Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an eye-opening story like this. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Marcus Reed adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy blue suit as he approached the check-in counter at JFK International Airport. His assistant, Sarah, had booked his first-class ticket well in advance. He had a packed schedule in Washington, and this flight was just another step in his relentless pursuit of justice and reform. The woman behind the counter, a middle-aged employee with a stiff posture and an air of impatience, barely glanced at him before sighing. "Name?" "Marcus Reed," he answered, offering a polite smile. Her fingers clacked against the keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen. Then she frowned. "I'm sorry, sir, but first class is full," she said, her tone flat and dismissive. Marcus furrowed his brows. "That's impossible. I booked my seat weeks ago." "There's been an issue with the system," she continued. "It looks like your reservation didn't go through. We can offer you a seat in economy." He felt the weight of her gaze, a quiet challenge. This wasn't the first time he had experienced subtle discrimination, but it never ceased to irritate him. He pulled out his phone and opened the confirmation email. "My reservation is right here," he said, turning the screen toward her. She barely glanced at it. "That must be a mistake. I assure you, there's no seat available." Marcus inhaled deeply, keeping his voice steady. "So, you're telling me that despite having a confirmed first-class ticket, I have no seat?" Before she could answer, a well-dressed man strolled up to the counter. He was tall, with neatly combed silver hair and the effortless confidence of someone used to privilege. "Graham Whitman," the man announced, handing over his passport with a smirk. Marcus's stomach tightened. He knew that name well. Senator Graham Whitman, his longtime political rival, a man who had built his career on policies that disproportionately harmed marginalized communities. The employee's demeanor changed instantly. She smiled, tapped a few keys, and within seconds printed out a boarding pass. "Here's your first-class ticket, Senator Whitman. Have a great flight." Marcus's lips curled into a wry smile. "Well, now that's interesting. You're telling me there's no seat for me, but somehow, one just opened up for him." The woman hesitated for a fraction of a second, then steeled herself. "I don't control the system, sir." Whitman turned to Marcus with a smirk. "Some of us just have better luck, Reed." Marcus clenched his jaw but refused to rise to the bait. Instead, he pulled out his phone and pressed a single button. "Sarah, I need you to check something for me," he said. Sarah, efficient as ever, was already on it. "Give me 30 seconds. Marcus stepped aside, arms crossed, watching the check-in counter like a hawk. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. Something was being manipulated behind the scenes, and he had a feeling Whitman was pulling the strings. A soft chime sounded in his earpiece. "Marcus," Sarah's voice came through, tight with urgency. "Your seat is still listed in the system, but there's a note attached. Do not assign to customer restricted." His fingers curled into a fist. "Restricted? Based on what?" Sarah hesitated. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but there's a pattern. There are similar restrictions on multiple other customers, all people of color." Marcus exhaled slowly, the reality settling over him. This wasn't just an isolated inconvenience. This was a deliberate policy. The woman at the counter shifted uncomfortably under his unrelenting gaze. She might have been following orders, but that didn't make her any less complicit. Marcus wasn't going to let this go. With a measured step, He turned back to the counter and placed both hands firmly on the surface. I think you should check the system again. Because if you don't, by tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the country will be asking why Grand Sky Airways denies service based on race. The color drained from her face. Just then, a sharp voice interrupted. What seems to be the problem here? Marcus turned to find a woman in a crisp navy blue suit, her piercing green eyes scanning the situation with authority. The gold nameplate on her lapel read, Olivia Carter, CEO. And just like that, the game had changed. The tension at the check-in counter was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus studied the woman standing before him, Olivia Carter, CEO of Grand Sky Airways. She was composed, but there was a flicker of unease in her sharp green eyes as she took in the scene. What seems to be the problem here? She repeated, her voice firm but professional. Marcus turned slightly, leveling his gaze at her. Apparently, my fully paid, confirmed first-class ticket no longer exists. He gestured toward Whitman, who was now casually flipping through his boarding pass. Yet, somehow, a seat appeared for him. Olivia's brows furrowed as she glanced at the check-in agent. Is this true? The woman hesitated, then stammered. The system had an issue, ma'am. His reservation wasn't processed correctly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Funny. Because my assistant just checked, and my seat is still in the system. The only problem is that it has a restriction attached to it, one that conveniently affects passengers who look like me. Whitman chuckled under his breath. Oh, come on, Reed. Not everything is a conspiracy. Marcus ignored him. He wasn't here to play Whitman's games. Instead, he kept his focus on Olivia. She was now tapping away on the check-in counter's keyboard, her expression growing darker with every passing second. Then she stilled. Her shoulders went rigid. What is it? Marcus asked. She exhaled through her nose, her lips pressing into a thin line. Mr. Reed, please step aside with me for a moment. Marcus didn't move. No. If there's something you found, I want it said right here. A pause. Then Olivia straightened, her voice carrying just enough weight to remind everyone who was in charge. As CEO of this airline, I do not tolerate discriminatory practices. She turned to the check-in agent. Pull up the list of restricted customers. The woman swallowed hard, but after a moment's hesitation, she complied. A few more keystrokes, and the screen displayed the list. Marcus leaned slightly, enough to see the names over a dozen. Every single one was a person of color. His jaw clenched. He had suspected, but seeing it confirmed was still a gut punch. Olivia's nostrils flared. Who authorized this? The check-in agent's eyes darted left and right, searching for an escape. I don't know, ma'am. The policy came from a voice behind them interrupted. That would be me. All heads turned. A tall man in an executive suit, salt and pepper hair slicked back, approached with a smug expression. His ID badge read Daniel Lockwood, Senior Vice President. Marcus had never met him, but his instincts screamed that this was the man pulling the strings. Olivia's voice was razor-sharp. Lockwood, what the hell is this? He offered a practiced, corporate smile. A necessary precaution. We have an image to uphold, Olivia. Our first-class cabin caters to an elite clientele. Certain passengers do not fit that aesthetic. His eyes flickered toward Marcus, unmistakable in his meaning. A slow, incredulous chuckle escaped Marcus. You just said that out loud. Lockwood shrugged. Nothing personal, Senator. Just business. Whitman smirked. A man who understands branding. I like it. Olivia, however, was seething. This is illegal. And worse, this is disgusting. Lockwood sighed, as if speaking to a child. You and I both know airlines have unspoken rules about their premium customers. I just made it official. Our data shows a certain type of clientele prefers a particular environment. Marcus stepped forward. So let me get this straight. You're saying first class should only cater to a specific demographic? That certain paying customers, despite having the same money, same status, same right to be here, should be denied service based on appearance. Lockwood didn't even flinch. I'm saying the experience matters. And you, he waved vaguely at Marcus, might not enhance that experience. A hush fell over the terminal. Sarah's voice buzzed in Marcus's earpiece. "Marcus, this is big. I just leaked the restricted list to 3 major news outlets. Give it 10 minutes." Marcus smiled faintly. Perfect timing. Turning back to Lockwood, he said calmly, "I hope you enjoy the next 24 hours, Mr. Lockwood, because your entire career is about to implode." Lockwood scoffed, but before he could reply, his phone buzzed. Then Olivia's. Then the check-in agents. And all around them, phones in the terminal started lighting up as notifications flooded in. The world had just found out. The murmur in the terminal swelled into a low roar. Travelers glanced at their phones, brows furrowing as they read the breaking news. Some whispered among themselves. Others outright gasped. A few raised their phones, subtly recording the scene as it unfolded. Marcus stood still, hands in his pockets, watching Lockwood's reaction with quiet amusement. The once smug executive's face paled as he stared at his phone screen, scanning the headline that had just detonated across the internet. Grand Sky Airways caught in racial discrimination scandal. Secret, restricted, passenger list exposed. Olivia Carter was reading the same article, her grip tightening around her phone. "Lockwood," she said, her voice like ice, "you better tell me right now, how long has this been going on?" Lockwood swallowed hard, but quickly tried to recover, adjusting his tie. "Olivia, don't be dramatic. This is being blown out of proportion. We need to contain the situation, not escalate it." Marcus let out a soft chuckle. "Contain it? Lockwood, you just got caught running a modern-day segregation policy. And you think this is something you can smooth over?" Whitman, who had been enjoying the show, finally folded his arms and turned to Lockwood. "Daniel, is this actually going to be a problem?" Lockwood exhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "I can fix it. This is just bad PR. Give it a few hours." Olivia cut him off. "Fix it." Her eyes blazed with fury. "Lockwood, I just got off the phone with our legal team. Do you have any idea what kind of lawsuits we're about to get hit with?" Lockwood scoffed. "We have NDAs. This will go away." Marcus shook his head. "Not this time." The moment that list leaked, every civil rights organization in the country saw it. Journalists are already swarming. Your NDAs are worth nothing against federal discrimination laws. Lockwood clenched his fists, his confidence finally showing cracks. And then, as if on cue, Olivia's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and turned pale. Without another word, she stepped away to answer. Marcus turned to Sarah, who was still feeding him updates through his earpiece. "Marcus," she said, her voice brimming with satisfaction, "it's happening. Stock prices are already plummeting. Investors are bailing. Shareholders are demanding answers. This is a full-scale corporate meltdown." Marcus allowed himself a slow smile. "Good." Meanwhile, Olivia's conversation was brief. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. She faced Lockwood. "Pack your things. You're done." A stunned silence followed. Lockwood blinked. "Excuse me." "I just got off the phone with the board," Olivia continued, voice cold and precise. "They've made their decision. You're fired. Effective immediately." Lockwood's mouth opened, but no words came out. His face turned red, then purple. "You can't be serious. I've been with this company for 15 years, and you just single-handedly destroyed its reputation in 15 minutes. Olivia gestured toward the terminal, where dozens of passengers were openly recording the scene. "This is going viral in real time. If we don't take decisive action, Grand Sky won't survive the week." Lockwood's fists trembled. He turned to Whitman, seeking support, but even the other senator had taken a cautious step back. Whitman adjusted his suit. "Sorry, Daniel, but I can't be associated with whatever this is." He shot Marcus a glare before stepping away. "Enjoy your flight, Reed." And just like that, he walked off toward the VIP lounge, abandoning his longtime ally. Lockwood, now completely cornered, looked back at Olivia. "You're making a mistake." "No," she said, "you did." Security personnel arrived at her signal, and Lockwood was escorted out of the terminal, his protests ignored. Marcus exhaled, shaking his head slightly. That was satisfying. Olivia shot him a look. Don't get too comfortable, Senator. This isn't over. Marcus arched an eyebrow. Oh, and what's next? She crossed her arms. Damage control. A public apology. A full investigation. And we need to make things right with the passengers we wronged. Marcus studied her for a moment before nodding. That's a start. She hesitated, then added, and you. I want you in that meeting. That caught him off guard. Excuse me. If we're going to fix this, we need credibility, Olivia said. You clearly aren't afraid to call out injustice. I need someone like that advising us moving forward. Marcus smirked. Let me guess, damage control? She didn't deny it. You get a seat at the table. In return, we get a chance to prove we can change. He considered it for a moment. Then he glanced at the first-class boarding pass that still sat on the counter. And with a smirk, he slid it back toward her. I think I'll take economy, he said. Let's see how your airline really treats people. Olivia's lips parted slightly, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded once. As Marcus walked toward the gate, passengers erupted into applause. And somewhere in the distance, Lockwood's career burned to the ground. As Marcus made his way toward the economy boarding gate, the energy in the terminal shifted. People were no longer just watching, they were engaging. Some clapped, others nodded in approval, and a few even reached out for a handshake. Senator Reid, you handled that like a pro, one man said, shaking his hand. Thank you for standing up to them, a young woman added. Marcus acknowledged them with a respectful nod, but he didn't let the attention distract him. He had made his move, but the game wasn't over yet. Sarah's voice came through his earpiece. Marcus, update for you. The story is exploding. Every major network is covering it. Grand Sky stock just dropped another 6%. And get this, civil rights groups are already calling for a federal investigation into their policies. Marcus exhaled. That was fast. You kicked the hornet's nest, boss. But Lockwood was just a symptom. The real disease is how many companies get away with this quietly. You sure about sitting in economy? It's going to be a long flight. That's exactly why I need to sit there, Marcus replied, stepping onto the plane. I want to see how deep this rot goes. As he entered the narrow aisle of the economy cabin, it was immediately clear he had made the right choice. First class versus economy. The difference was staggering. The first class section, visible just beyond the divider, was pristine, spacious seats, personalized service, and an air of exclusivity. Meanwhile, economy was the exact opposite. Overcrowded rows, worn-out seats, a baby crying somewhere near the back, flight attendants moving briskly, barely making eye contact with passengers. The second Marcus stepped into the economy section. Passengers took notice. Murmurs spread. Some travelers discreetly snapped photos, while others simply stared in disbelief. Is that Marcus Reid? Someone whispered. He's flying economy? A middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an indignant expression looked up from her seat. Senator Reid, they bumped you down too. Marcus stopped, intrigued. Bumped. She huffed. Yeah, me and my husband booked premium economy. Paid extra for it. But when we got here, they suddenly said there were technical issues and moved us back here. Her husband chimed in. And we're not the only ones. Look around. Marcus glanced around the cabin. He recognized the pattern immediately. Most of the passengers seated in this cramped section were minorities. Coincidence? Not likely. Sarah's voice buzzed in his ear again. Marcus, I just checked the passenger list. You're not going to like this. Tell me. At least 15 passengers, mostly Black, Latino, and Asian, were reassigned from premium economy or business class to standard economy. And guess what? Every single one of those upgraded spots went to white passengers. Marcus's jaw tightened. This wasn't just one bad employee making biased decisions at check-in. This was systemic. He turned back to the couple. Can you do me a favor? The woman frowned. What is it? Would you be willing to go on record about this? Her lips pressed into a tight line, but she gave a firm nod. Damn right I would. Someone needs to expose this nonsense. Marcus smiled. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Just then, a flight attendant approached a young man who looked like he had just started his career. He glanced at Marcus, clearly nervous. Senator Reed, I just wanted to say, it's an honor to have you on board. Appreciate that, Marcus said, watching him carefully. You seem tense. The flight attendant hesitated, then lowered his voice. Sir, if you're sitting back here, you should know management isn't happy. They're trying to figure out how to handle you. Marcus smirked. Let them try. The young man exhaled, relieved, before quickly moving away. Marcus took his seat in the middle of the economy cabin. He was surrounded by passengers who had been slighted, ignored, and forced into a system designed to make them feel less than. But for the first time, they weren't invisible. They had a voice. And Marcus intended to make sure the whole world heard it. As Marcus settled into his seat, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. The passengers around him, their frustration, their shared experiences were proof that this airline's discrimination ran deeper than a single check-in counter. The intercom crackled to life. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We're expecting a smooth flight to Washington, D.C., with some minor turbulence along the way. Please fasten your seatbelts and enjoy your flight with Grand Sky Airways. Marcus smirked. Turbulence was an understatement. Sarah's voice buzzed in his earpiece. Marcus, I just intercepted something interesting. Grand Sky's internal crisis team is scrambling. They're considering removing you from the flight, citing a security concern. His eyes darkened. They wouldn't dare. After what just happened to check-in, they might. Before Marcus could respond, a shadow loomed over him. He looked up to see a different flight attendant, this time a middle-aged woman with sharp features and a forced smile. Senator Reed, she said sweetly, but with an unmistakable edge. Would you mind stepping to the front of the plane for a moment? The captain would like to speak with you privately. Marcus leaned back, arms crossed. Anything he has to say, he can say right here. Her smile didn't falter, but a flicker of annoyance flashed in her eyes. I'm afraid this is a sensitive matter, sir. The passengers around him started paying attention. Whispers spread. They're trying to remove him, someone muttered. This is ridiculous, another said. Marcus turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the woman who had spoken up earlier about being bumped from premium economy. She gave him a firm nod, as if to say, we're watching. We won't let them do this quietly. Marcus exhaled slowly, then met the flight attendant's gaze. Let me guess. Security concerns? She hesitated, then gave a small, rehearsed nod. The captain just wants to ensure all passengers feel comfortable. Marcus chuckled. Right. Because nothing makes people more comfortable than watching a black senator get escorted off a plane for no reason. A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, glaring at the flight attendant. She hesitated again. Sir, we can discuss this at the front. Marcus shook his head. No, I'm staying right here. But if the captain insists, I'd be happy to discuss this with him after we land, perhaps in front of a congressional panel. That did it. The flight attendant's confidence wavered. Her eyes darted toward the first-class section, as if seeking guidance. Marcus followed her gaze, and there, just beyond the divider, sat Whitman, watching the exchange with amusement. So that's how they were playing this. Whitman had pulled strings to get Marcus removed. But now, with the entire economy section witnessing this, Grand Sky had a new problem. The passengers were on Marcus's side. The woman in the aisle seat next to him, fierce, determined, leaned forward and spoke just loud enough for the flight attendant to hear. If you remove him, I'll record the whole thing. A man across the aisle added, and I'll post it before you even land. Someone behind them chimed in. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. The pressure was building. The flight attendant's forced smile wavered. She tapped her earpiece, listening to an incoming message. Then, with great reluctance, she nodded stiffly. Very well, Senator Reed. Enjoy your flight. She turned sharply and walked away. A collective exhale swept through the cabin. That was close, Sarah whispered in his ear. Marcus allowed himself a small grin. Yeah, but they're not done yet. He glanced toward first class again. Whitman was no longer watching. He had turned away, pretending to read a newspaper. Coward. But Marcus wasn't celebrating yet. This was only round one. He knew the airline would try again, and he'd be ready. The flight had barely reached cruising altitude when Marcus sensed a shift in the air. It wasn't just the gentle hum of the engines or the quiet rustling of passengers. Settling in it was something deeper. A tension, thick and unspoken, lingered like a storm waiting to break. Across the aisle, the woman who had defended him earlier leaned in. "You think they'll try again?" she asked in a low voice. Marcus smirked. "Oh, they will. But they won't make the same mistake twice." Sarah's voice buzzed in his earpiece. "Marcus, I've been monitoring Grand Sky's internal channels. They're panicking." That flight attendant was following direct orders to de-escalate the situation. But guess what? The higher-ups are split. "Meaning?" Marcus asked. "Meaning some executives want to play it safe and leave you alone, but others, probably Whitman's friends, are still trying to find a way to shut you down." Marcus exhaled. "Let me guess. They're going to try something subtle this time." "Exactly. I'm betting they'll mess with your service, isolate you, make you as uncomfortable as possible. Maybe even try to provoke you into reacting." Marcus glanced around the cabin. It was already happening. The flight attendants who had been serving drinks moments ago suddenly skipped over his row. Passengers ahead and behind him received beverages, but when he looked up expectantly, the crew didn't even glance his way. The woman next to him noticed. "Unbelievable," she muttered. Marcus remained silent, observing. Minutes passed. A different flight attendant came by, offering a tray of meals. She paused at the row before his, handing out food. Then she moved past him without a word. The man in the aisle seat, who had also been bumped from premium economy, frowned. "Excuse me," he called out. "You skipped us." The flight attendant hesitated, then forced a tight smile. "I'm sorry, sir. We've run out of meals for this section." Marcus arched an eyebrow. "That's strange. We're not even halfway through service." The flight attendant's jaw tightened. "We had a supply issue, sir." Marcus chuckled. "Supply issue? On a fully stocked, pre-planned flight? That's a new one." Sarah's voice came in his ear. "Marcus, I just checked the flight manifest. There are exactly as many meals as passengers." "They're lying." The woman beside him turned to the flight attendant, arms crossed. "You're really going to do this?" Right in front of everyone. More. Passengers were paying attention now. Murmurs spread. A few people took out their phones, subtly recording. The flight attendant, realizing the trap she had walked into, swallowed hard. "I'll check with the galley." She hurried off, disappearing behind the curtain. Marcus exhaled. "They're making this too easy." His seatmate shook her head. "I've flown this airline for years, and I've never seen anything like this." Marcus leaned back. "That's the thing. This isn't new. It's just the first time they're being watched this closely." Minutes later, the flight attendant returned, holding a tray she had very clearly been told to bring. She placed it in front of Marcus, her forced politeness almost painful to watch. "Apologies, sir. Here's your meal." Marcus smiled. "See? That wasn't so hard." She didn't respond. She simply walked away, her hands clenched at her sides. Sarah's voice returned. "Marcus, it's happening. The press is picking up on the fact that you chose to sit in economy. People are asking questions. The airline's PR team just issued a statement saying all passengers receive equal and exceptional service." Marcus grinned. They might want to revise that statement. But as he picked up his fork, something caught his eye. A movement. Subtle. Deliberate. Across the cabin, a man in a navy blue blazer shifted in his seat. He wasn't watching Marcus directly, but his posture was too focused, too still. He had an earpiece discreet, but visible. And unlike the other passengers, he wasn't reacting to anything happening around him. Marcus recognized the type immediately. Security. Corporate. And not the friendly kind. He wasn't just dealing with flight attendants trying to mess with his meal service. Grand Sky had put someone on this flight to watch him. And that meant they were planning something bigger. Marcus barely touched his meal. His mind was too busy analyzing the man in the navy blue blazer. The posture, the earpiece, the way his eyes flickered toward Marcus without ever truly looking at him. This wasn't just some airline staffer. This was corporate security. Sarah's voice came through his earpiece, low and sharp. "Marcus, I see him. He wasn't on the original flight manifest." Marcus's grip on his fork tightened slightly. Meaning he was added last minute, probably after the scandal broke. Marcus exhaled slowly. So Grand Sky wasn't just trying to make his flight miserable. They were actively monitoring him. His seatmate, the woman who had backed him up earlier, noticed his change in demeanor. "What is it?" "Third row from the front, window seat," Marcus murmured. "The guy in the blazer." She followed his gaze carefully. "He doesn't look like a regular passenger." "Because he's not," Marcus said. "He's watching me, probably waiting for the right moment to act." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "So what do we do?" "We wait." Marcus picked up his fork again and casually resumed eating. "They're expecting me to make the first move. Let's not give them that satisfaction." A few rows ahead, the man in the blazer shifted slightly, pretending to adjust his sleeve. Marcus caught the quick glance in his direction. This was a chess game now, and Marcus was going to make sure he stayed 3 moves ahead. The plane hummed steadily as it soared through the sky. Most passengers had settled in, some reading, others napping. But Marcus was keenly aware of every small movement. Then it happened. The man in the blazer stood up, stretched like any normal traveler, and began walking down the aisle right toward Marcus. Sarah's voice crackled in his ear. "Heads up. He's making his move." Marcus didn't react. He simply waited. As expected, the man slowed when he reached Marcus's row, pausing just long enough to adjust the overhead bin. Then, as if noticing Marcus for the first time, he turned with an easy smile. "Senator Reed, right?" Marcus looked up, feigning mild surprise. "That depends. Who's asking?" The man chuckled, slipping one hand into his pocket. "Just a fan. I follow politics." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Politics? Or corporate damage control?" A flicker of something passed through the man's expression, gone almost instantly. But Marcus saw it. "Just a traveler," the man said smoothly. "I actually work in public relations." "Funny coincidence, huh?" Marcus leaned back in his seat. "Hilarious." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, I just wanted to say, I hope you enjoy the flight. Let me know if you need anything." With that, he continued down the aisle, blending back into the crowd. Sarah's voice came through immediately. "Marcus, he just planted something under your seat." Marcus's entire body tensed, but he kept his expression neutral. "You sure?" "I've got eyes on the security footage." He slipped something under while pretending to adjust his shoe. Could be nothing. Could be everything. Marcus exhaled slowly. "All right. Let's not panic." He reached down casually, as if adjusting his own shoe, and felt around beneath the seat. His fingers brushed against something smooth and rectangular, taped securely in place. He pulled back. Too risky to remove it now. Too many eyes. Sarah's voice was tight. "Marcus, you need to be careful. We don't know what that is." Marcus nodded subtly, keeping his voice steady. "We're about to find out." Instead of confronting the man in the blazer, Marcus turned to his seatmate. "I need a favor." She arched an eyebrow. "What kind of favor?" "Can you discreetly take a photo of the guy? Then send it to my assistant." She hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Done." She angled her phone just enough to capture the man as he made his way toward the rear of the plane. A quick tap, and the image was sent. Sarah's voice returned a moment later. "Got it. Running facial recognition now." Marcus exhaled. "Let's see who our friend really is." In the meantime, he leaned back, his mind already working through possibilities. Best case scenario? The device was just a recording tool meant to catch him in a compromising conversation. Worst case? Something much more dangerous. Either way, Grand Sky was playing a dangerous game, and Marcus was about to flip the board. Marcus remained still, his mind processing every possibility. The object taped beneath his seat was a problem, but not an immediate one. Whatever it was, Grand Sky's corporate muscle wasn't reckless enough to pull something overtly illegal in a cabin full of witnesses. That meant it wasn't an immediate physical threat. No explosives. No toxins. But it could be something equally dangerous, a planted device meant to frame him. Sarah's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Marcus, I got a hit on our guy. His name is Adam Faulkner, former corporate security for a Fortune 500 airline. Now works for a surprise crisis management firm that specializes in reputation containment." Marcus smirked. "Let me guess, one of their biggest clients is Grand Sky Airways?" "Bingo," Sarah confirmed. "They don't just clean up messes, they eliminate them." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. That meant Faulkner was here for more than just observation. He was an active player in whatever Grand Sky was trying to pull. And Marcus was the target. Carefully, Marcus glanced at the rear of the plane. Faulkner had settled into an empty seat near the galley, pretending to scroll through his phone. Waiting. Watching. Sarah continued, "Marcus, we need to know what's under that seat, but pulling it off now would be risky." Marcus agreed. Too many eyes. Too many variables. His seatmate, who had been tracking the tension on his face, leaned in. "You're playing it cool, but I can tell something's wrong." What did he plant? Marcus chose his words carefully. "I don't know yet, but I have a feeling Grand Sky is trying to set me up." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "What do you need?" Marcus thought fast. He needed a distraction, something that would allow him to retrieve the device unnoticed. And then, an opportunity presented itself. A flight attendant, one of the more junior ones, judging by her nervous energy, was moving down the aisle, serving drinks. As she reached a row just ahead of them, she tripped, sending an entire tray of beverages flying. Passengers gasped as soda and juice splattered onto seats and clothing. The flight attendant, wide-eyed and mortified, scrambled to apologize. Chaos. Exactly what Marcus needed. Moving quickly, he reached down and peeled the object from beneath his seat. It was a small black recording device. A camera. His pulse remained steady. So, this was their angle. If he had said something heated, something that could be taken out of context, the footage would have been leaked. A manufactured scandal. A well-placed headline. Marcus Reed melts down in mid-air confrontation. Classic political sabotage. Marcus slipped the device into his pocket just as passengers around him started calming down. The spilled drinks were being cleaned up, and Faulkner, still at the back of the plane, hadn't noticed a thing. Sarah's voice returned. "Marcus, what was it?" "A hidden camera," Marcus murmured. "They were hoping I'd lose my temper." Sarah let out a slow whistle. "They really thought you'd fall for something that basic?" "They underestimated me," Marcus said. "Now we use that against them." Marcus tapped his fingers against the tray table, thinking. If Grand Sky wanted a scandal, maybe it was time to give them one, just not the one they expected. "Sarah, can you access Grand Sky's PR channels?" "You mean hack into their internal crisis messaging?" she asked. "Already did it 20 minutes ago." Marcus grinned. "Good. Because I need you to push out a new leak, one that we control." Sarah's voice perked up. "I like where this is going." Marcus lowered his voice. "I want it discovered that Grand Sky secretly plants surveillance devices on passengers they consider problematic. Use their own internal security footage to back it up." A pause. Then Sarah laughed. "Marcus, you are evil." "I love it." Marcus smirked. "Let's see how they like being under scrutiny." Sarah got to work. Meanwhile, Marcus leaned back in his seat, feeling the weight of the hidden camera in his pocket. Grand Sky had wanted to frame him. Instead, they had just handed him the evidence to bury them. Marcus sat back in his seat, feeling the weight of the hidden camera in his pocket. Grand Sky had set the trap, but now they were the ones walking into it. Sarah's voice returned in his earpiece, laced with excitement. "Marcus, it's done. I just sent the leak through a back channel. The headline reads, 'Whistleblower exposes Grand Sky's secret passenger surveillance program.'" Marcus exhaled, pleased. "And the source?" "A concerned insider from their own PR team," Sarah said. leaked internal security footage, anonymous statements, even a memo suggesting selective monitoring of passengers. Marcus grinned. Perfect. A few minutes passed, and then the reaction started. Passengers began murmuring, their phones lighting up with notifications. "Are you seeing this?" a young man across the aisle said, scrolling rapidly. Grand Sky's being accused of spying on its own customers. "Wait, what?" his seatmate leaned in. "You mean like recording us without consent?" A woman nearby frowned. "That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." Marcus stayed silent, letting the outrage spread naturally. Sarah whispered in his ear, "Marcus, I'm watching Grand Sky's internal comms. Their legal team is in full panic mode. They're scrambling to issue a denial." Marcus smirked. Too late. Suddenly, the intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'd like to assure our valued passengers that your privacy and comfort are our top priorities. Any rumors suggesting otherwise are completely unfounded." Marcus shook his head. Classic mistake. Denying a scandal before it fully erupted? That only made people more suspicious. Passengers exchanged skeptical looks. "That was fast," someone muttered. "Sounds like they're covering something up." The tension in the cabin thickened. And then the moment Marcus was waiting for arrived. A flight attendant rushed up to Faulkner, the man in the blazer, and whispered something urgent. His posture stiffened. Then, slowly, his eyes lifted, locking onto Marcus. Marcus met his gaze, calm and unshaken. Faulkner knew. He had just realized that he was now the one being watched. Faulkner stood, adjusting his blazer like a man about to make a last-ditch effort. He stepped into the aisle and started walking toward Marcus. Sarah's voice came through his earpiece. "Here he comes." Marcus didn't move. He simply waited. Faulkner stopped at his row, putting on his best PR smile. "Senator Reed, may I have a word?" Marcus glanced up, pretending to consider. "Haven't we already exchanged pleasantries?" Faulkner chuckled, though his jaw was tight. "I think a private conversation would be beneficial." Marcus folded his hands. "You mean like the private conversation your flight attendant tried to arrange before takeoff?" A flicker of irritation crossed Faulkner's face. "I think you'll find that we have mutual interests, Senator." Marcus smiled. "You mean like your airline not getting sued into oblivion?" Faulkner exhaled sharply. "Let's be civil about this. We don't want things getting out of hand." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Faulkner?" The way he said the name, deliberate, pointed, made Faulkner's composure crack for just a second. Passengers around them were now openly watching. Phones were subtly being lifted. Faulkner glanced around, realizing he had lost control of the situation. "You've made your point," he said, lowering his voice. "But if you back down now, we can work something out." Marcus chuckled. "And what exactly are you offering?" Faulkner hesitated. He didn't have an offer, because he was the one desperate now. Sarah's voice came through in Marcus's ear. "Grand Sky stock just tanked another 10%. Investors are pulling out. Their board just called an emergency meeting. The CEO is being pressured to make a drastic move." Marcus tilted his head. "I'll tell you what, Mr. Faulkner. Since I'm feeling generous, I'll let your bosses decide how this ends." Faulkner blinked. "What?" Marcus smiled. "You should check your email. I believe your CEO has a message for you." Faulkner's phone vibrated. He frowned, pulling it out, scanning the screen. His face turned a shade paler. Sarah's voice came through Marcus's earpiece. "Marcus, I just got confirmation. Olivia Carter, Grand Sky's CEO, just issued a directive. Faulkner is being terminated." Marcus smirked. Checkmate. Faulkner slowly lowered his phone, realization dawning. He was done. Marcus leaned back. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to enjoy the rest of my flight." Faulkner clenched his jaw. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the front of the plane, disappearing into the first-class cabin. Passengers around Marcus exhaled, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A man across the aisle gave him a nod. That was incredible. Marcus simply smiled. "It's amazing what happens when people start paying attention." Sarah's voice returned, quieter this time. Marcus, we did it. He exhaled. Not yet. There was still one more move left to make. And it was going to happen the moment this plane landed. The plane began its descent, tilting slightly as it cut through the clouds over Washington, D.C. The hum of conversation in the cabin had quieted, but Marcus could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. They had all seen at the confrontation the humiliation of Grand Sky's corporate enforcer, the thinly veiled threats that had collapsed under the pressure of public scrutiny. And now, as the landing gear deployed with a heavy thud, Marcus knew that the real battle was just about to begin. Sarah's voice came through his earpiece, crisp and controlled. Marcus, Grand Sky just made their first official move. Their PR team is scrambling. They've issued a public apology. Marcus smirked. Let me guess. Carefully worded. No admission of wrongdoing. Exactly. We are deeply concerned about the recent allegations and will be conducting an internal review. Marcus chuckled. Classic corporate non-apology. Let's see how that plays in the next few hours. Sarah continued, but here's where it gets interesting. Olivia Carter, their CEO, just put out a separate, unofficial statement. One that wasn't run through PR. That caught Marcus's attention. Go on. She just announced that Grand Sky will be dismantling their restricted passenger list and launching an independent audit into discriminatory practices. Sarah paused. She also fired 3 executives. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Olivia Carter was playing her own game. That's unexpected, he admitted. Sarah exhaled. Yeah, she's either trying to save herself or she actually wants to fix things. Marcus considered it. Carter had reacted fast. Too fast for someone just trying to cover up a scandal. She might be smarter than I gave her credit for, he murmured. The plane touched down smoothly, the tires screeching slightly against the runway. As the engines roared in deceleration, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt, preparing for what came next. The moment the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers erupted into applause. Marcus blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Then came the voices. Thank you, Senator. You stood up for all of us. This was long overdue. He looked around, seeing passengers smiling, nodding, some even shaking his hand as they gathered their belongings. The woman who had sat next to him grinned. You just changed the airline industry, she said. Marcus let out a small chuckle. Let's see if it sticks. He grabbed his carry-on, but before he could step into the aisle, an announcement came over the intercom. Senator Reid, please report to the front of the aircraft before disembarking. Marcus exchanged a look with his seatmate. Here we go. As he stepped into first class, Olivia Carter was waiting for him. The CEO stood tall, composed, but Marcus could see the strain in her eyes. She had been fighting a war, behind the scenes, one against her own company, her own board. Senator, she greeted, nodding. Quite the eventful flight. Marcus met her gaze. You could say that. She sighed. I won't waste your time. The board wanted to handle this differently. I disagreed. I noticed, Marcus said. Firing your own people? Publicly dismantling your discrimination policy? You're either serious or you're the best damage control strategist I've ever seen. Olivia's lips twitched. Maybe both. A pause. Then, she extended a hand. I'd like to work with you, she said. To fix this. For real. Marcus studied her for a moment. Then, he shook her hand. By the time Marcus stepped off the plane, the media was waiting. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and Sarah was already feeding updates into his earpiece. Marcus, it's official, Grand Sky just announced a total overhaul of their passenger policies. It's all over the news. Marcus adjusted his jacket and smiled at the cameras. The airline had tried to take him down. Instead, they had given him the power to change the system. And this was just the beginning. And just like that, one flight exposed an entire system of discrimination. What started as a denied first-class seat turned into a movement, one that forced an airline to change its ways. But this isn't just about Marcus Reid. This is about all of us. How many times have people faced injustice, but had no platform to fight back? How many corporations quietly enforce policies that keep people out not because of money, but because of who they are? Marcus stood up, and the world listened. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Should more companies be held accountable for their hidden biases? Have you ever experienced something like this? Let us know in the comments below, and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you want more stories that expose injustice, reveal hidden truths, and keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We've got more eye-opening stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.